Hello there, my name is Terry, and I'm the guy who runs this podcast, the Animation Industry Podcast. Today, I'm chatting with a writer for animation, and his name is James Walsh. James is currently living and working out of Scotland and is part of the freelance writing team for the super smash hit preschool show Hey Dugee, which airs on the BBC in the UK and Nick Jr. in the US. Plus, it has nearly 1 billion views on YouTube. James began writing for children's TV animation back in 2015 and has also since worked as a development writer, helping studios shape their series ideas and create killer pitch Bibles. So if you are involved in any sort of the process of writing TV show episodes or want to, this is an excellent listen since James gets into the nitty-gritty of what makes a successful story for TV. So let's jump right into the chat. Hello there, James. Thanks for coming on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat because I've never had a writer specifically on the podcast. I've had people who worked as showrunners and storyboard artists and things like that, which kind of touch on the writing side, but I've never had somebody who's just a writer. So from your perspective, how is writing tied into animation?
I mean, it's pretty integral. Animation is a means of telling a story, and you can't tell a story in any way without writing it somehow. Even if it's physical, completely physical, silent, a silent story, it's still, you're still writing it. You're still creating characters and trying to evoke emotion and reactions from an audience, and that's what writing is. So for me, it's like it's not so much about dialogue and words on a page as it is about actually kind of building a story and building characters.
So when you talk about writing, are you talking about like writing specifically for animation is like its own thing, or just storytelling in general for anything, I guess?
I mean, I guess it depends how much you boil it down, because fundamentally, whether you're writing for, say, like live action, whether it's features or television, whether you're writing, short stories or epic novels, like you're still using the same fundamental principles of storytelling. And I think when you ask about, say, what is writing for animation, a lot of that comes down to like kind of very, very small elements about how do we write action differently for, say, animation versus live action, and obviously like writing scripts is a different practice to writing fiction or prose. Like there are those elements if I say I'm a writer for animation, that doesn't mean I only write animation, or that the stories I'm writing for animation are necessarily like couldn't be told in another medium. Necessarily, the way I write them is suited to, the characters could be in anything. The stories quite often could be told in loads of different ways. But the way I write within a script, and it's more that writing for animation makes me think about how I'm writing in the first place and what I'm focusing on and the kind of jokes I'm telling and how I'm making it visual and how I'm making it like exciting and expansive and using those things that animation can do that you can't do with other things. The way that you can use certain characters, the way that you can use physical comedy that you can only really do in animation that you can't do elsewhere.
So that makes sense. So from your view, I guess you can niche yourself in only writing for animation because it is very different than other mediums, I guess.
Oh yeah, definitely. There are lots of writers in animation here in the UK, and I'm assuming like all over the world who specialize in doing that thing, because that's, they've grown up. A lot of people you meet in animation are obsessive about animation, about the history of it and the creators of it and the kind of the icons of that genre. So it's a medium that allows you to do very specific things, and if those are the kinds of stories you like to tell, then that's what you're going to want to write. And yeah, you absolutely can. You can niche in it. It's not something where I think you would take any writer for animation and be like, yeah, you could write anything else. That's not necessarily the case at all. Like some people are much better suited to writing for animation because that's where their taste, their sensibilities, their mindset kind of goes, and that's where the stories they want to tell kind of sit better.
Gotcha. So I guess just to be clear, you are primarily a writer. Do you animate as well, or do you storyboard, or do you get involved in any other aspects of animation, or just writing?
No, I don't. I'm just a writer. So I write scripts and I develop series ideas from kind of concept through to like kind of pitch Bible and series Bible level. But I don't even really, I like to draw. I love art. Obviously I'm interested in in visual arts, because it's why I've ended up, I think, writing for animation, because I'm drawn to those kinds of stories. But I'm not a good enough artist myself to be able to do that work. I'm not good enough as an artist to storyboard or do character design, or to animate. So no, I'm a scriptwriter. That's my job.
Nice. Something I guess I think there's maybe a little bit misconception around is back when I had my business job and I was like hiring writers, a lot of people say they love to write or they love writing. And that is, I'd say, much bigger than the actual people who are good at writing. And I actually found it really tough to find somebody who's really good at writing to work with. So from your experience and work, what makes a good writer?
I mean, that's a tough question to ask, because it's a combination of lots of things. I think writing for animation and writing for television especially, I think, because writing has always been one of those things, and whether it's within film or television, or say even like copywriting for advertising, because it's words on a page, because it's essentially a free thing to be able to do, and you learn to write words down from a very young age. No one's taught to animate from the age of 3 or 4 years old, but you are taught how to write sentences and stories at school when you're very, very young. So people kind of grow up with this inherent feeling of like, yeah, I can write, because I can write sentences in an order, and how hard can it be? But I don't think it's necessarily about whether people can write, but like you say, it's whether or not people can write well. And that is something that takes a lot of, I think, to be able to be a good scriptwriter, especially, takes, for me, the fundamental skill of a good writer is understanding character is the first thing. So really understanding kind of how to build characters, what makes characters interesting. And that comes down to kind of, those elements of storytelling, like conflict and understanding kind of external motivation and internal motivation, and how to find out what's interesting within a character's personality and their drive and what they want. So you've got to be able to harness that. And I think another thing is understanding how to create drama. So how to manipulate the elements of a story, whether, be that character, setting, and plot, in order to really like build your story into a satisfying climax, and understanding how to go from setting up a story all the way through to delivering on a nice poignant closing, but still going through that kind of typical 3-act structure, which is what the majority of stories use. And that's where I think people who like writing struggle to get beyond that first stage of like, oh, I'm telling the story and I really like it and I'm really interested in the characters. I'm not entirely sure how to make this gripping, and how to make it kind of compulsive, and how to make that structure kind of clean and clear, and how to move it along at a pace rather than just kind of going off on a kind of flight of fancy. And it's the difference between I always think of it as a difference between kind of fan fiction and the real thing.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people out there writing stories about Game of Thrones and Star Wars that aren't very good. They love that story. They love writing those stories, but they're nothing compared to that real thing. And it takes a good writer to write that real thing in the first place,
Gotcha. So good writing comes from building up characters and creating drama and something that's gripping to read. And well, maybe we can talk about this later. I was going to ask you, how do you develop that specific skill, or how do you know when you're like, hey, I love writing, now I need to take it to the next level, and where does that come from? But maybe we can just kind of flesh that out in your journey for your career itself.
Yeah,
Might as well.
My journey, like my career, is quite a good example of how I think I was one of those people quite early on in my career who thought, I've got this, like, I know this is fine. Like I've watched films and I've watched television my whole life. Like I started watching movies at a very young age, and my dad works in the film industry. So I spent a lot of time when I was a kid, in his office. He's a film editor, and he used to work on kind of physical film. So he used to edit movies using celluloid, using like a Steenbeck, the really old kind of film projector that you'd be able to look through a little kind of monitor. And when he was editing movies, he would leave rolls of film, like the cuts that he was making, hanging on a bin. It's not it's kind of literal trash can, but it's essentially made of cloth, and it had little hooks above it. And I would climb in the bin and like look through these little strips of film and see how each frame was building into one another. And I would be able to see how characters moved. And I would then start to kind of think about how I like to join them up. And this was when I was about kind of 6, 7 years old. And I was like obsessed with watching films from a really early age. They took me to see everything they could. I remember, I think my first time going to the movie was going to see Animal Farm when I was about 5 or 6, which was harrowing. It was a really scary film to go and see when you're like 5. So I grew up like adoring movies and adoring animation and kind of, funneling through my Disney VHS tapes. I think I had like 4 copies of Aladdin because I burnt through them so many times when I was little. My mum just had to keep buying me new copies of that VHS.
Oh, nice. What were some of the films that you saw your dad working on?
So he was mostly live action. And when I was young, he did a couple of kind of live action kids films. They were a little bit dark for me when I was that age. So he did a film called The Wolves of Willoughby Chase, which was quite young. His kind of breakthrough movie was, he edited Bridget Jones' Diary when I was kind of old at that time. I think I was about 10, maybe 11. And I kind of understood that it was a big deal. I didn't really get the film for obvious reasons. And then he started moving into like bigger budget things and doing kind of, more kind of like Hollywood style, big studio, like tentpole films. But all the way along, and I ended up studying film writing as an MA. And when I went into I was working with him for a bit, and then I went into this master's degree. I came out of this master's degree with this kind of quite drab, long, boring feature film that was quite dreary. It's kind of very like low budget, grim drama about, a girl by a canal, like looking sad and, feeding her dog. And it was like kind of an hour and a half of that. It was very dry. It's very, very like, gut wrenching stuff with some like big, like serious dramatic moments in it. And I came out of my master's degree and I thought, cool. Okay. Now I'm a writer. Like I've written a script now. So I'm a writer now. And it took me about 6 or 7 years of trying to write feature films. And I did that classic thing of, I want to write movies. So I'm just going to go and write movies. And it's an incredibly it's a very naive thing to think, because it's a bit like coming out of, it's a little bit like being interested in architecture and being like, cool, yeah, I'm an architect. Like I'll build a skyscraper now. But you really do, and I really do believe this, like you really do have to try and find a way to study and learn, not just necessarily like on a course, but by writing things of different types and different scales and different sizes. And I really do recommend to writers to start out small, write short films, and it's what's really good about writing TV animation is that I'm writing short scripts now, but for a long time I was writing 2-hour-long feature scripts and trying to sell them to people. And I didn't really know my craft at that point. I didn't know how to rewrite my work very well. I was good at kind of building stories, but when it came to the nitty gritty of actually writing and rewriting and editing, I struggled with that. And I would leap into scripts before I'd done a proper outline. So it took me a long time to kind of get that, to make those mistakes and fail and learn from those failures a bit.
So, sorry.
That's what I would say to writers is that if you're going to develop your writing skills, the best way to do them is to be kind of humble about it and recognize that you're probably not very good when you start out, and that you need to try and find ways to learn in any way possible. And that's by watching as many films as you can, reading as many scripts as you can, writing as many scripts as you can, and not thinking that like the first draft of anything you do is really going to be any good.
So you basically grew up seeing your father edit films, which you would then later on, write for. So you had like very early exposure to somebody who had already honed their craft. And then you went and got a master's in script writing, and then you spent 7 years script writing. So from my point of view, I'd say you have a pretty good foundation of, experience and knowing what to do. What was that thing? When did it like click for you that you weren't doing it, I don't know, successfully or the way that it should be done?
The biggest shock for me, I think I was about 5 years. So about 5 years after I graduated from my master's degree, I had written, I think, two or three feature spec screenplays, and a couple of them were good enough to get a little bit of interest from people across in the US. So a director and a manager over there had like asked to read my stuff and were interested in kind of working with me. I didn't have an awful lot of, again, I was quite naive about how movies got made, how much time I was likely to spend working with people that never realistically had any plan to make a film with me, but were just kind of hoping that I would do a lot of work for them and then hand them a great script that they could go and sell and get a project off the ground. And it was when I actually got an agent off the back of one of my scripts, and I got represented by a big agency in the UK, and I had a really, really great agent. And I was so excited. And I thought, as I think a lot of writers do at an early stage in their career, I thought getting an agent was basically it. Like, that was the start of my career. And from then on, my agent would find me work, and I would just have to write, and loads of people, my scripts would just be flying out to producers and directors all over the place, and everyone would be really as excited in me as my agent was, and that was it, and that'd be fine. And it wasn't the case, and it isn't the case for anyone. Like, it doesn't change an awful lot, other than when you do get a chance to work with somebody, your agent will be able to negotiate you a better deal on the off chance that you're offered a deal in the first place, which is quite rare. So I had this kind of weird moment of suddenly realizing that the thing that I thought was probably going to launch my career to where I wanted it to be wasn't going to do that. And at the same time, a script that I've been working on for a while came back from some people, and the notes were, I thought it was the best thing I'd ever written. And the notes I got back were, it's a good try, which is not an easy note to get. But the protagonist isn't great. Your antagonist probably needs a bit of work as well. And the world needs working on. So I was like, okay, so the world, the antagonist, and the protagonist. So
everything.
That's everything.
That's pretty brutal.
It was like, it came to me through my agent. So I was given those notes in a kind of very soft, a very soft gloves kind of way. And he said, this is good. Like, these are some really cool studios that have read this work, and they want to read your next draft, I think. And I think he was saying that politely when they weren't really that interested in it. But after that, at that point, that was the first time I got a kind of proper writer's, I wouldn't call it writer's block, because it didn't feel like I was trying to write. I went into this weird lockdown where I just went, oh wow, I didn't realize that the mountain was this steep.
Yeah.
And that it was going to be this hard to climb. And so for about 6 months, I kind of pretended to work on this script, when really I was just going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then it wasn't long after that actually, like, me and my agent, I realized that, like, I was not in a position to probably have that agent at that time. And it wasn't long after that, luckily, that I moved into animation. Otherwise, I kind of am not sure where I'd be right now. I don't know if I would have carried on writing feature films.
So what kept you going that whole time, like 7 years out of university, and still trying to make it and not finding the success that you kind of dreamed for? What was that thing that you were pursuing?
I mean, I think naivety had a little bit to do with it. And I think it can be really helpful and healthy when you're young to just go for it. Like, you're at a stage where you're like, I'm doing this, like, I'm going to write for a bit. And you're 20, I was in my 20s, and I was just thinking, this is fine. Like, I can work an evening job. Like, I can work behind the bar in the evenings, and I can do like little bits of weird weekend work, and basically build jobs around a 9 to 5 where I'm writing scripts and I'm feeling like a professional writer. And then later on in my 20s, I was like, okay, I've been doing this for 6-7 years now. And, and then I was getting married when I was 29, 30, and life happens and, like, comes at you. And that's when you start to think, oh, this needs to be a career, or I need to find a career. And like I said, I was kind of very lucky that I had people around me that were very supportive and helped me learn and helped me feel like able to try and be a writer without feeling like a weight of responsibility on myself. I didn't have, basically, thankfully, because my dad works in the business and understands it, he wasn't at my back saying,
Right.
Son, you go out and get a proper job, like, which a lot of parents would have done after a while. He was super supportive about it, and as was my wife and everybody else around me. So I was really lucky there, and I kind of was naive for a while. And when it did hit, and when I did get to a stage where I thought, oh, I'm not sure if this is going the way I want it to go, that was when I got a couple of really, really good, like, lucky breaks at the right time, and just got those little bits of work that took me forward. And by no means did I suddenly rocket into being like a very, what you'd even call like a successful writer. It was just little bits of work here and there.
Gotcha. Well,
yeah.
being on this podcast means you're super successful. So,
You know what I mean?
But so I'm just wondering, you can get a master's in screenwriting. Or script writing, how typical is your journey versus your classmates? Do some of them go off to write for films right away, or does everybody kind of experience this same hard awakening to the industry?
You know, this might sound kind of like cold and ruthless. I have no idea. I have no idea what the rest of my classmates did. I went off and just kind of did my own thing. I think, from what I've seen, and social media is quite kind of good and bad for this, I guess, because you get the odd glimpse every now and again of what other people are doing that you haven't seen for like 10 years. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anyone on my course has made it into a career. I know that it's, whether you've done a course or not, it's like your odds are slim. I mean, in feature films, your odds are very, very, very slim. And that's what I studied. I studied feature film screenwriting. So I didn't study, they didn't teach me how to write for television. They didn't teach me how to write for animation, or, especially not kids television. We were looking at how to write films, and that is like trying to, that's like trying to become a professional, NFL player or something. It's like the odds are very, very short.
Well, how many feature films are made every year? So like
fewer and fewer of the time. It's not getting easier, but it's a great time to get into other things. Like, it's a really, really good time to get into animation and kids content, because the streaming platforms are hoovering that stuff up at the moment. So it's
Yeah, for sure. So I know that one thing we had talked about before that you didn't really share in your journey was that you actually worked with kids a lot through your, side jobs. You were, so that helped, I'm sure, when it came to writing for kids animation. But if you could go back now, like knowing where you are now, would you have taken the script writing, or would you have taken general writing, or would you have specialized in something different, or, was the script writing perfect for this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think I honestly think that with creative writing courses, there's so much that can't be guaranteed about it, that you can, it's a combination of the people who are on the course, the people who are teaching the course, and what happens to those people when they leave. There isn't really, I'm not sure there's a course out there that is going to hurt you as a writer. Do you know what I mean? I would say, if you have the chance, if you want to be a professional screenwriter and you have the chance to go and do a screenwriting course, go and do a screenwriting course. Like, it's great. It's brilliant. You get to hone your craft. You get to come out of it with scripts. You get to be around other writers. It's a really, really cool thing to do. But if you can't go on a course, or you didn't get on that screenwriting course, that is not going to hinder you in any way, shape, or form. Like, it's not a necessity at all. Yeah, and I think what I wish I'd done was start writing earlier. Started writing when I was at university. When I was studying like English and theatre at university, I should have been writing then. We had a whole film school on campus, and I didn't use it. Didn't ever make the most of that time, and that's what I regret the most. I think my master's degree was a great experience, and I did a lot of work on it. But I wish I'd started earlier, so I had made the most of all that spare time I had and the people that were around that could have helped me.
Well, there you go. If you want to become a writer, start writing yesterday.
Yeah.
So let's chat about how you actually got into animation. How did you go from, you mentioned your break before, maybe you can explain what that actually entailed.
So, I mean, I guess this, it shows you that even when you're writing things, that even when you don't feel like the work you're doing is really getting any traction, always writing new things, ultimately, I think, is the most important thing you can do is writing new scripts and showing them to people. Because I got my break like 3 years after having worked with a producer on a feature film. So I was commissioned to, I can't remember when this was. This is probably about 2011 or 12. I was about 3 or 4 years out of my master's degree, had a couple of these feature films under my belt, and a producer came to me to ask me to adapt a classic kind of children's novel from the 70s. And they're these kind of beautiful fantasy novels by a guy called Alan Garner. And he was a British author, and they were very weird and very strange, but like really, really lovely stories about young kids and jewels and witches and wizards and, you know, things like that. So I did that work, and it wasn't as well paid as it should have been. It wasn't as well paid as it would have been if I was in America and I was, say, in the Writers Guild, but I got through 3 drafts of a script. I was getting notes back from an award-winning kind of producer and director on them. So that was a really, really cool experience for me. And however many years down the line, the project never got off the ground. I think the option or the rights to the book lapsed. So that script is now just like essentially a meaningless thing that can't ever get made, I don't think. But that same producer, about 3 or 4 years after I did that work, called me out of the blue and said, I'm going on to produce an animated series here in England. And he was working on a series called Dennis and Nasher Unleashed. And it's a kind of, it was an animated series aimed at 6 to 10s. And it was for the BBC, and it was Dennis the Menace, which I think, you know, fairly most people around the world have kind of heard of Dennis the Menace, maybe not like don't know that character and the comic strip that he came from, which is called the Beano, which is like a proper heritage comic here in the UK. It's something that, you know, most kids have read, you know, have picked up off the shelves in their local shop, and read that comic. And Dennis is this brilliant, like, naughty character that you just love reading when you're a kid, because he gets to do all the stuff that you don't get to do. And they were making a new animated series of that. And so he was looking for kind of fresh talent that he could bring to the table into the writer's room. And he asked me to do it. And I went through the process of essentially, I guess you'd call it like applying for the job in a way. I had a writing CV that was the feature films I'd done, but I hadn't written for animation, and I hadn't written for children at that point, and I hadn't written for television either. So I didn't really tick any of the boxes apart from I could write. And they asked me to do a sample episode, and I did that, and they liked it, and they invited me into the writer's room. I did it unpaid because it felt like a shot at something, and it was a cool show that I knew the characters. And then I went, and that was my first job in animation and in kids television, and that was that was like 2013, 14, 4 or 5 years ago.
I think it's quite random that somebody you worked with 3 years prior just happened to like working with you, and then it paid off. But how did this producer get in touch with you in the first place? Because you said he reached out to you. Did you send him something? Did he hear through the grapevine that you were looking for work?
It was like a shared connection through a friend of a friend. I mean, it's so weird. It's like 6 degrees of separation. I don't really know how to trace back where I first met him. But a script I'd written, I think the script I wrote when I left my master's degree, which was a kind of pulpy US like B-movie horror script. He'd read that, and I think that had gotten into the hands of him through a friend of a friend, and then we'd spoken about something then, and then 2 years later he'd got in touch again. I mean, this is kind of, I think especially in Hollywood, this is definitely how it works in features, where people they take the, it's this completely random thing where you're on someone's radar and you don't really even realize. And I think it really shows the importance of, like I said, like writing scripts and sending them to people and getting your work in front of people, because you really never know who's going to read something and like it, and you don't know how long it's going to be before they might get in touch with you.
So what is showing it to people and sending it out actually mean? Like, so I've written something, mm-hmm. and I've mustered up the confidence where I'm like, I want to show this to somebody else.
Yeah.
What do I do? Where do I start?
So it depends on what it is. And so if it's a feature film, you would, there's no rules, and that's what's really frustrating. And that's what's really scary, I think, is that there's no like set process to go through. Some producers accept scripts, some like from writers they don't know, some don't. Some agents accept scripts from writers they don't know, some don't. Same for directors, actors. Like, I think a big part of it, and I know we'll probably get onto this later, is networking, and whether it's like hard networking where you're going to events and you're shaking everyone's hand and you're saying, hi, I'm a writer, this is where I'm from, this is what I do. Nowadays, I think obviously you have a website and you can network online on places like Twitter and LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's about just introducing yourself to people, saying, I've written this script, I'd love you to read it. Are you willing to do that? And sometimes they will not reply at all. Sometimes they'll reply and say, I'm really sorry, I'm too busy, or I'm sorry, I don't accept scripts from unsolicited writers. So solicited and unsolicited is a word that you'll hear a lot, where if people say we don't accept scripts from unsolicited scripts, that means unless you've been given permission to send them something, which is normally through an agent or a production company, they don't want to read anything. And that's completely understandable for a lot of people, because their reading piles are enormous, or it's too risky legally speaking that if someone just sends them a random script and it's like something they've made or they're making, they can get, there's a risk. A lot of producers don't want to run that risk of like, I don't want you coming back and saying, I sent you this script, it's really similar to that film you made, so you must have copied my work. So yeah, you just have to do the kind of the nitty gritty work of emailing people whose work you like, or who you've been talking to already online, and just saying and asking and being polite about it. And what's lovely is that you can ask. Like, it's not like a big golden gate that you need a magic ticket to get into. Like, you can ask. And if your work is good and you've got enough work to show people, and I would always say that, like, one thing, most of the time, one script isn't enough. You normally need more than one sample, depending on, your relationship with someone. So send them a script and be ready for them to say, this is great, but, I'm not that interested, or I don't want to, if it's an agent, they might say, this is really cool, but, I'm full and I don't want to take you on right now. That's fine. And the same goes for producers. They might say, this is just not my thing, or I'm too busy. But you keep doing it and you keep sending, right? And it's like, you have to keep, I don't want to say it's a lottery, but you kind of have to keep buying that ticket. You have to make your own luck, essentially. It's what it's about. Like, it is about luck. It is about timing, but you have to make that luck by writing and approaching people as often as you feel like you can, without it becoming just exhausting and demoralizing.
Yeah, what you just said reminds me of when I was at a marketing conference, and Mark Hamill was a guest speaker of all people for a marketing conference. And one of the questions was, how did you land your role on Star Wars? And he was like, your acting career is like a big, like, roulette wheel, and you just have to keep spinning it and spinning it and spinning it. And maybe, hopefully, you'll eventually hit gold, but if you don't spin it, you don't hit anything. So he was like, I just kept spinning and spinning and spinning, and finally something paid off, which sounds similar to what you were doing as well. Are you part of a writing association as well? Is that a thing?
No, not over here. It's not. We don't really have the same infrastructure for writers over here that they have in the US. I know that the Writers Guild in the US is a really, really strong, great union that really represents writers well, and they have a lot of like support groups and a lot of writing communities there that doesn't really exist here. And I'm actually I'm not even in London in the UK. So I live in the south of Scotland. And our writing community here is even smaller, especially screenwriting. There's very few kind of established script writers in Scotland. There are some brilliant writers and brilliant directors up here, but it's a smaller country with a smaller population. So we don't have the same infrastructure. So a lot of it is about finding a community online. And I think when you work on, when you do get that first job, a lot of in the animation industry, especially in the UK, people are very aware of taking new writers and bringing them into the fold, because it is a business where who is very, very important here, especially because that's how you get onto writing teams, when the same head writer takes you onto those teams. And that's how you start to get established, and that's how you start to get more credits, and that's how you then start to get more work, or you do get that agent that can get you more work. And yeah, so much of that is about getting into the room in the first place, being a person in the room that people want to keep talking to and want to stay in touch with, and then just building those relationships. And I think it goes in waves where you get generations. You know, a lot of the people who are head writers now have been writing for the same amount of time and have worked on shows together for a long time, and we're cutting their teeth at the same time. And there's a generation of us now who are kind of in our, like, you know, early to mid 30s who are kind of coming up and through at the same time, and hopefully will be the same, that will be that wave. And it's important to kind of to relate to and know, and not feel like people of your similar generation are competitors, that you're actually all working towards a similar sort of goal. And even though we don't have kind of functioning guilds in the same way, it provides a similar function. I think that we kind of do it independently. Gotcha. And hang out together and keep in touch, you know.
Sounds like it takes a lot of perseverance to really get into this career. I'm wondering if you can chat through how you made the jump into Hey Dugee then.
So Hey Dugee, this is another good example of, yeah, like you say, perseverance. So Hey Dugee is a kind of has a very big cult following here. And I don't say cult in like it's a small show that no one knows. Like, it's a big hit.
It's for kids in a cult.
Yeah, it's essentially, he is like a cult leader, Dugee. And but it's a show that like parents talk about, because it's a show for preschool children, so children of like 4 years old, that is like immediately entertaining for grown-ups in a kind of very cutesy. It's got lots of kind of cultural references in it. It's got a great soundtrack. It looks gorgeous. The jokes are funny. The physical comedy is funny. It has this funny balance of not talking down to kids, but also it doesn't babyfy anything, but it still talks to kids on their level and in their language. And when my son was born about just almost 4 years ago now, we started watching Hey Dugee when he was quite young. And I was writing on Dennis and Nasha at that stage. And I went, right, I need another show. Like, I want to keep doing this, but no one's going to give me this work just willy-nilly. I need to go out and find these jobs. And in order to do that, I need to find out who's making these shows I like, and then I need to write to them and ask them if I can write for them. And that's essentially here anyway how it works, which is really strange. Like, it doesn't feel like that's how it should work, but it is. And with Hey Dugee, I emailed the creator of the show, who is still basically directing most of the episodes and is the like big driving force behind it. He's a guy called Grant Orchard. And I emailed him and I said, I love this show. My son loves this show. These are the episodes that I think that are my favorite, that I really connect with. This is why I like them. And look, I'm a writer just getting started in my career. If you ever need writers on Hey Dugee, I'd love to be considered for it. Let me know, and I'm always happy to send a script or a sample. You know, something in those words. Like, I'm kind of being quite conversational about it, but it was pretty much that kind of tone. And he didn't get back to me for a bit, so I chased him up and I said, "Hi, did you get my email?" And he said, "Yes, I did get your email. Thank you so much. Like, I'm so glad you liked those episodes. I really like those episodes as well. And funny you should ask, we actually are looking for writers right now. Why don't I put you in touch with our producer?" And he did. And she put me in touch with the head writer, and she gave me a couple of little writing tests to do. And after I'd done those, I'd gone through a couple of very, very small, much less than I did on the first show. When I went through those, they said, "Okay, we're going to give you an episode to do." And then I was on the writing team for Hey Dugee, and that happened in the space of about a month.
Oh, wow, that's kismet right there.
It was the coolest thing that had ever happened to me. It felt way cooler than getting commissioned to write, you know, even a draft of a feature film, because I knew how much of a kind of random pie in the sky like dream getting any feature film off the ground is. Even if you get paid to write the script, you're still a million miles from the finish line. But getting commissioned to write an episode of a television show that I knew people liked, I knew that my name would be on a credit like on an episode of that show. And so that's like been the highlight of my career so far, I think, that first episode of Hey Dugee.
I really like the email that you sent. You know, like I think most people when they're applying for jobs, they wait until something is posted, or they kind of like timidly write something like, hey, do you have any openings? Like, get in touch with me. But instead you're just like, hey, I love this show. I watch it with my son. I love these specific episodes. You know, I'm a writer. I'd love to work with you if you ever have the opportunity. I feel like something like that stands out a little bit more than, and the fact that you wrote the creator as well, than, you know, hitting up the average HR person to say, is anything going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming at it from a point of view of, I mean, all of my experience is in the UK, so I'm very aware that the animation industry in the UK is a lot smaller and a lot more independent than it is in the US. It would be very different, I think, probably writing an email to Disney or Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it should be. And I think that what's lovely about shows is that the people who create them tend to stay involved, and head writers on shows, you know, the head writers on shows and the kind of the showrunners that I've met and I've spoken to who do work in the US are all lovely people. And I don't think they would blink twice at getting an email from someone like me. I think with Dugee, it's a great story. I think fundamentally at the heart of it, it was really good timing. Like the fact that they needed a writer at that point was probably very fortunate. And I've written to a lot of other head writers, and I've written to a lot of other development execs, and I've written to a lot of other producers saying exactly the same thing, taking exactly the same approach, and not getting work.
Right.
And because there's not any episodes on the series that they're working on. They're fully staffed, or they're already at the end of the production cycle, or they're waiting for financing, or whatever the reasons are. Like 99% of the time, that email has not resulted in me getting work. But that person knows who I am. They know that I'm nice. They know that I like the show. And if I write them another email in 6 months' time, something might have changed, or it might have changed 6 months after that, or 6 months after that. You know, it's been 2 or 3 years now, and like I'm getting more work, but it's not like there's no, like I said, there's no formula to it. There's no magic fix. There's no magic email. There's no magic template. You just have to, like I said, like keep trying and keep talking to people, and think of networking and think of that process of approaching people as something that is like built into your job. Like that's not something you do when you've got time. Like that should be something you build in to do every week. Write to someone. If you can write to someone new, say 5 people new every week, do that, because you'll feel like you're moving forward. You'll feel like you're making progress, or you're at least like trying. If you send off like 1 email and you sit and you wait, you're just going to start to feel like nothing's going for you. But if you keep making new approaches and you keep writing new things, that keeps you going. And before you know it, people start to get back to you. And it does take time, and it does take patience, I think, is a really important value to have as a writer. Like patience, whether you're a working writer or not, like patience in the script process, patience in the networking, patience just with your own brain and creativity. It takes a lot of patience all the time.
When I was first starting out after school, I had this first schooling I did. I had this naivety as well that, you know, once I start putting myself out in the world's going to reciprocate. I'm going to get offers. I'm going to get hired, et cetera, et cetera. But no, it's exactly like you said, where 99% of the time you hear nothing, and you got to keep, you know, you said buying that ticket or spinning that wheel. But it's also easy to, like, I was like obsessed with reading like Wikipedia, like article or profiles on like people I thought were great and famous, and it was like did this and got their big break. But you know, you don't hear about all the hard work it takes and how one thing 3 years later maybe paid off for you, because it's very easy to look back after the fact and say, oh, that's why he was successful.
I remember really distinctly reading a story in a newspaper, and it was about a British writer who had sent a script to Steven Spielberg, and he had got a call in the middle of the night, like 1 a.m, and it was like, hey, it's Steven. And that was the crux of the story, right? And this story was pitched in the style of British writer gets big break, you know, writes script, sends it to Spielberg, gonna be a motion picture in 2 years' time. And like 6 or 7 paragraphs down this article, it said in one line, like, so-and-so has been writing for 15 years in some capacity. And I was like, right, there we go. So he spent 15 years learning how to be a writer and building his craft and learning his craft and building himself a body of work. Like, shit doesn't happen like a fairy tale. It just isn't. It just doesn't work that way. And I think sometimes it's quite easy to get sold that dream, I think. And the reality is that actually it is about like hard work and perseverance and patience. And I think that's a good thing, because those are really important values that more people have than like some magical talent. Do you know what I mean?
And then you feel grateful when you do get something. I'm wondering if we can actually go into the process of what you do when you write for a kid show like Hey Dugee. Like, can you explain from nothing existing to handing off the script? Like, what is that for you? Who talks to you, etc.?
So the person I deal with the most on Hey Dugee, and it is the same with every show I've written on, and I assume it's the same worldwide, is I deal with the head writer, and she would be called a showrunner on other projects, I guess. It's fundamentally the same job. It's her job to handle all the writers, dish out episodes for writers to work on, bring in all of the outlines and scripts, and then get notes back from producers at the broadcaster and from the director and from producers, work those notes into a format where she can give them back to us. We can work off them and send her new things. And the way it goes is, on Hey Dugee, we don't have a writer's room. So we don't have a room that we go into and sit and generate ideas for episodes and then get assigned those episodes. It's quite unusual in that sense. I think even here in the UK, most shows have writers' days where all the writers get together, you pitch ideas back and forth, and you go around the room. And if you're pitching a good idea for an episode, everyone in the room will kind of figure out the nuts and bolts of that episode so that essentially you can boil it down to 2 or 3 lines, or what we'd call a springboard. So that's the first term that you learn in the process is the springboard. And on most projects, you get that in a writer's room. On Hey Dugee, I'm sent that by the head writer and the director. They work on springboards themselves for episodes. They then send that springboard. So I get 2 or 3 lines of a story. My first job when they commission me to write that episode. So what's lovely about the show as well is that when they want me to write an episode, they just commission me to write that episode. They don't ask me to do any work free of charge before they commission that episode. They're confident that it's going to work. They've signed it off with the broadcaster already, and they send it straight to me, and I get to work.
Is the free work typical of other shows?
On some shows, you will do a certain amount of work on, say, building a springboard into, say, like a 1-page outline. So the process typically goes, you go from in developing an episode of television, you'd go from a springboard, which is, say, 2 to 3 lines, to maybe a half page, but normally a full page of A4. So you take that story, you develop it into a page of A4. Then you're going to go from that page of A4 into, say, 3 or 4 still prose. So you're not writing in screenplay format. You're just writing as you would in a normal like Word document, as if you're writing a short story. And then you might grow that again into something bigger if it's a show that's got a lot of detail or the episodes are quite long, say 11 minutes or 20-minute long episodes. And then when you've finished the outlining phase, when you've gone from, say, like a springboard to, say, a 1-page outline to what we'd call a treatment, which is the kind of 4, 5, 6-page story outline, then you would go into your first draft, and you would typically do, I'd say, 2 drafts of the screenplay and then a polish at the end, which is just a very, last few lines and details. And so on Hey Dugee, I don't have to do any work. I'm given the springboard, and I know that I'm going to see that episode through to the end, and I'm getting paid to start at the beginning, and then I get paid again. Well, I think when I get to like script stage, then I get another payment then. But on other shows, especially with ones with writers' rooms, there is sometimes an element where you leave with your springboard, and the head writer might have said, "Okay, I like this. Can you write this up into a 1-page outline?" You'll go away, you'll write that up, you'll send that back, and they might say, "Okay, we're not sure this story works that way. What about this? What about this? Can you, it's not this character doesn't have enough an emotional arc, or can we raise the stakes a bit more? You'll go away, you'll do a bit more work on that. And obviously it's different from show to show. Every writer kind of has their limits, I think, in terms of how much work they're willing to do before they say, actually, like, I can't do another draft of this without getting paid. But typically, you'd expect, I think even most writers would do maybe like 1, maybe 2 drafts of an initial like 1-page outline. And then the head writer would in that stage say, okay, this is good. We're gonna take this. We're gonna commission this as a full episode now. And then you're in a contract, and then you sign the contract, and then you're doing the paid work from there on. You're still doing the same process. You're still going from 1 page to say 3 or 4 to say 6 or 7, and then draft. But that's the process the whole way through, really.
How long does this actually take in time?
Well, because you spend a lot of time sitting and waiting for them to get back to you with notes, I'd say typically on Hey Dugee, it can be anywhere between say like a month and 3 months of me just kind of sitting. But like if they're in the middle of a production pipeline, I saw the look on your face and you're like, what?
Yeah, because aren't episodes made like on a regular schedule?
Yes, they are. There's a again, like it's quite like using the show that I'm writing for as a difficult example, because they do things quite differently, and I know the director is like very heavily involved.
That's fine, because it's still a process.
Yeah, it tends to be the same, I think, and it depends where you are. Like if there's a rush on scripts and they're rushing to try and get through like a few more episodes at the end of a series, they might have a chance to like get through that process and get notes back to you quickly. If they're not in a rush, if their deadline, if they're not due to send them off to the broadcaster anytime soon, they might take their time, and they might allow for whatever reason it might be slow to get back to you sometimes. Typically, within a writer's agreement, within a writer's contract, there are stipulations of like, you've got 4 days to turn around an outline, and you've got 10 days to turn around a first draft, and you've got another, so there is tend to be in writing a stipulation of how quickly you have to get each bit back to them. And the same goes for them. It tends to be that you will get notes within 3 or 4 days of having sent us anything. Whether that happens in the real world isn't always the case. And obviously as a writer, you have to be flexible, and you have to be your own kind of agent sometimes and say, okay, this is like, you're asking me to turn something around in 2 days, and then you're taking 3 weeks to get back to me. That's not okay. But it tends to be a natural kind of tit for tat, and no one wants it to slow down to like a glacial pace.
So I'm just wondering if it takes maybe up to 3 months for one episode. Are they sending out multiple episodes to different writers, and you're one of many writers?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. So they have a steady stream of episodes coming in. It's just... Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry. There's on Hey Dugee, I think we've got about 7 or 8 writers who are part of the kind of Hey Dugee writing team. Some of those writers have written 15 episodes. Some of them are on their first, and there tends to be this kind of natural cycle where you get up to a certain number of episodes, and then they just kind of release you into the wild. They kind of go, your job here is done. You're free to leave. And yeah, and I'm terrified of that day coming. I really don't want that day to happen. But that I completely understand that, and I think it's important for them to have fresh voices and fresh ideas coming on and coming through, because you can run out of gas on a certain series. There's only so many times you can get your head into that space of writing for certain characters who have certain voices and are in a certain world, and tell those kinds of stories before you, as a writer, need to feel the need to go and do something new.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, and most shows are the same. Most shows will have a writing team of at least like 5, 6, 7 writers.
Wow.
And it's very, very young, like very, very young preschool shows. I'd say sometimes you see that those shows are written by one person the whole way through, but they might be writing like 3-minute episodes rather than 20.
Right. How involved are you in the actual animation of a like, I'm just picturing you sitting at home writing and then sending it through like email or whatever. But I'm thinking, so you don't actually touch any of the animation, or you're not even in contact with any of the animators or storyboard artists or anything? That's a
No.
big no. So you mentioned before, like the physical comedy in Hey Dugee is great. How much involved are you with writing things for animation? Like, I don't know, a side note, like, I don't know, Dougie stretches into 2 feet tall legs or something like that in this part, or do you leave that up to the animator to determine?
No, not at all. We're expected to do that. Like we are, and I think this applies to anyone who wants to write for animation. You are going to need to think of yourself not just as a writer, but also kind of as a director, because it's in animation more so than anywhere else. You are able to direct on the page, and you're kind of expected to direct on the page a lot more. Because of the physical nature of it, because of the process of animation, I guess, and you'll know more about this than me probably. Because a lot of the time scripts go from me to a storyboard artist to somebody else, and when it goes through that animation kind of pipeline, someone is going to need to read my script and know exactly where they're putting people on the screen. So it's not the director can't point 6 cameras at a character and say, oh, I'll just pick my angles when I'm done with this scene. On Dougie, I'm expected to say where characters enter from, how many characters we're seeing on screen at any one time, whether I'm using, say, like a close-up or a mid-shot or a wide shot, how I'm transitioning from shots to shot. Are we tracking? Are we panning? Like I'm doing all the things that you're kind of told not to do as a screenwriter. Most screenwriting books will tell you, like, don't direct the camera, like don't say pan here or track here or move here, like just tell us what we see, and it's the director's job to interpret that. The director is in charge of the visual style. But actually on Hey Dugee especially, we are expected to put our visual imprint on that script in a really kind of heavy way. And I love it for that, because it really like indulges my inner Spielberg.
So are you also, when you're writing, are you also like keeping a doodle of everything that's going on, or like intensely visualizing it in your mind? It sounds like you kind of have to imagine the animation as it's happening and write it too.
Yeah, it is. It's about keeping it, for me anyway, it's about keeping it in my mind's eye, and really being able to kind of translate what I see in my head. And actually, a lot of the notes that I got back on my first couple of episodes were visual notes of like, we need to know, like, you know, big red lines of like, what is happening here? Like, where are people going? Like, it can't just be, you know, the plane zooms off and we cut to here. Like it needs to be like, okay, are we seeing the plane from behind or from the side, or are we seeing it from above? And are we going inside or outside? Who's looking out the window? Like all that stuff. And I've learned to be a lot more specific and kind of give myself permission to indulge that side of myself. And it is, I think some people on Hey Dugee especially are both animators and writers. And I think that's a lot of the episodes that feel really unique in Hey Dugee are written by animators and the kind of people who animate and write together. And you can tell because everything just feels very seamless and very visually, the narrative feels very visual rather than just the narrative being written and the visuals being there to support that. So yeah, it's brilliant. It's a really, really cool show to be able to do that on, actually.
So I'm assuming you still watch the show.
Yeah.
Assuming you still watch the show.
Yeah.
Do you watch an episode and like it comes out pretty exact to what you had written, or is, you know, there's still things that surprise you or things that change through that process?
There's definitely things that you see that aren't in the script. It's very rare that they won't. You know, one of the joys of being an animator, I think, or a designer, is a lot of the designers put incredible touches on them. I think the first episode I wrote was essentially a kind of this is weird for a preschool show, but it was essentially inspired by Alien and Outbreak and Stranger Things and Predator and like really violent movies from the 90s and the 80s. And I actually didn't think of Stranger Things when I was writing it. I was thinking of Predator and I was thinking of Alien and things like that. And essentially, one of the characters gets infected by the world's smelliest cheese and runs and manages to get out of this clubhouse where they're having their kind of fun day. And so they have to chase him out into the jungle and try and track him down. And he's leaving blue footprints everywhere, and there's mist and smoke and like. But I didn't see it as a Stranger Things episode until I saw it on the television, and they had added this beautiful layer of like blue mist everywhere, and they were using a very like synthy Stranger Things soundtrack, and they were in yellow quarantine hazmat suits, and I was like, it's Stranger Things. And it made total sense. They hadn't changed a single ounce of the story. It was just a brilliant touch of design, and it just linked the whole thing in together. It was wicked. And then you see everyone online. You see parents online going, "Oh my God, there's a Stranger Things episode of Hey Dugee. This is mad." And I'm going, "Yeah, that's me. I like that."
I love that you took your inspiration from very adult and even like horror themed things for kids. Because when I think of preschool shows, I'm thinking, okay, like maybe kids like fart jokes, or maybe kids like bright colors, but you mentioned before, like toning it, like this show is not toning it down or dumbing it down for the audience. You're actually bringing in like themes from, I guess, different inspirational movies you've grown up watching and kind of recreating them for a preschool audience. Are there other weird things you've taken inspiration for to bring into this kids show?
Okay, so the episodes I've done a Stranger Things like Spielberg-esque horror-ish thriller episode. I've done an inner space type episode where they fly inside a body, but in a kind of very magical, like we're not at all flying inside a person kind of situation. I've done an Agatha Christie kind of murder mystery style episode, but the principles of what I'm using as inspiration is very much kind of tonal and visual. So obviously no one's getting murdered in an episode of a preschool show, and obviously no one is getting attacked by aliens. There's not really any true like horror elements, but what's really fun about Hey Dugee, and I think a lot of great shows that are for kids over the years have done similar things. The early Nickelodeon shows were really similar to this, like did not hold back on the kind of the kind of not gross, but the bolder visual choices, shall we say, and like the jokes that can be gross but are also quite clever. And I think with Dugee, for example, the murder mystery episode, I took all the brilliant visual elements of an Agatha Christie story. So kind of like black and white flashbacks, fancy rich parties, people playing like nervous bits of piano, and a mystery to solve. And I used those fundamental elements and the kind of language and the pace of an Agatha Christie story to create something that would still be really interesting and gripping for preschoolers, and really funny and cute, but familiar and recognizable to adults. So you're taking these genre elements and you're using them as a kind of wink and a nod rather than an overt, like we're doing a murder story for children. You're very much going, let's put these characters in like tuxedos and have them try and solve a problem next to a fireplace, basically, with like tense music.
So it also kind of sounds like you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. You're taking formats that are already proven successful and you're applying them to the show. Do you think that is a good formula to follow?
Yeah, I think that's what everybody does, don't they? Like,
I don't know. I'm asking you. You're the writer.
No, I think yes, I do. Particularly my style. I'm really heavily influenced by cultural things and pop culture. I'm not into kind of comic book culture or superhero or kind of fantasy sci-fi culture in the way that, but I have that same kind of pop culture fan element about things like Jurassic Park and Jaws and Back to the Future and Indiana Jones and like those big adventure based movies from the 90s that I like just wolfed down when I was a kid. And so that is built kind of deep into my subconscious, and I watch an awful lot of cartoons now, and I read a lot of comics as well. So I read a lot of Calvin and Hobbes and Gary Larson, and I take a lot of tonal inspiration from that, and Monty Python, because and Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. Like it comes from everywhere, and you cherry pick. I think when you sit down to write, it can be really helpful, and I think a lot of writers do this, and it's not a shameful thing to do in the slightest. Is a lot of writers will sit down, and if they're writing a tense scene, they'll listen to tense music. And if they're writing something funny, they might sit and watch something. They might watch comedy for a little while. I know a writer who likes to sit and watch old like silent movies from the 20s just to get him in the mood for kind of jaunty slapstick comedy. And it makes total sense. Like we absorb these things and they don't go anywhere. So we might as well use them, is my attitude. I'm like, why try to reinvent the wheel when you can use the things that are already built into your psyche and get there quicker? Like, I don't want to, I don't want to create culture.
A thought popped into my head and I wanted to ask you it earlier. Can you just give an example of a springboard, like those 2 sentences? What would they say that start an episode?
Okay, so for something like Hey Dugee, I guess a springboard. So I'll take the first episode I did for them was, again, like this character, one of the kids. So Dougie is about a dog, and he has 5 young animals who go to, essentially it's like the scouts. So they go to like Dougie, they go to nursery every day or kind of play school every day. And he teaches them things, and they learn something every episode. So the springboard for my first episode was when one of they're called the squirrels, when one of the squirrels touches the world's smelliest cheese, Dougie and the other squirrels have to track Rolly, is the character, track Rolly down and clean him to contain the outbreak. And that's what it was.
Okay.
So and within that's just one sentence, to be fair. But within that one sentence is a kind of a beginning and a middle and an end. So you've got a setup at the beginning, which is, when one of these characters does this thing, this happens. And that is what launches you. You know that you're going to start the episode in the same way that you start most episodes. The world is always going to be the same because that's the kind of foundations of an episode of television. You're going to go into this world that you recognize. Something is going to happen which projects them into a problem. So Rolly touches this cheese, and suddenly they have to get him back. And when he runs off, they have to get him back. And obviously, we're talking about a 7-minute episode of television, so I don't have room for like 5 acts and acts within acts. Like, I'm talking about quite a quick story we've got to get through. So they're out. They have to find him, and when they find him, that's how they're going to contain the outbreak, and that's it. And that's like, so in order to solve this problem, they have to do this, and that's it. And that's my springboard. And to flesh that out, then I have to think about the mechanics of, okay, why is this cheese there in the first place? How does this character come to touch it when he shouldn't? And how does he escape? What steps do they go through to try and find him? And then how do they eventually find him? Like, how do they resolve that problem in the end? And within Dougie, there are rules that will say, okay, so it always has to be those main characters, those kids who solve the problem. Ultimately, it can't be solved by someone else. It can't be solved by accident. It has to be them who find a way to fix that problem. Because that's one of those elements we were talking about before in how to create drama and how to tell a good story, is that if your heroes don't save the day, if someone saves it for them, it's not as interesting, is it? It's not as fun. So you have those typical things that happen in every episode, and within that episode there will be scenes that are essentially cut and paste from episode to episode, like a title sequence or an intro sequence or a scene at the end where they say goodbye. Every episode has those same scenes, and I can just cut and paste those into a script. But everything else, I then have to build around that initial frame. And quite a lot of the time, the springboard that we have at the start of an episode, we kind of lose it through the process, but it gets us going, and that's what's important, right? It's the first log on the fire, and it just gets you going. Gotcha. And it gets things burning. So yeah.
Sounds like a lot of problem solving. So I'm in school right now, and in my 4th year, I have to create a thesis film that should be about 1 minute. I've been taking kind of notes of what you've been saying on things to nail. You mentioned the arc, getting the stakes or raising the stakes. You got to hit the world, the character, and you just mentioned a bunch of stuff in the story elements of the climax and stuff like that. What are like the essentials of creating a good story that I'm gonna have to write? Like, what should I hit on to create a really good 1 minute or 7 minute or 20-minute film?
Well, I think you just covered it mostly.
Okay,
Like, I think what's really what's always really, really fundamental is, like, character is the first thing about any story. It doesn't matter if you're in the most elaborate, beautiful, well-imagined world. If the character who's in that environment doesn't want anything, isn't after anything, doesn't believe in anything, then that character isn't an interesting character to follow through a journey, because there's nothing really that can get in their way, because they don't want anything. So how can you take it away from them? Or how can you, right. If they're not trying to achieve anything, then they can't fail, and that's not interesting. So what I always think is really, really interesting about a character is belief. And I kind of come around to this, and you'll see this a lot in animation and in kids television as well, is that interesting characters are kind of fundamentalists in a way. They're kind of extremists. They believe something, and they believe it to be absolutely true. And if you can think of a character who believes something and almost cannot be convinced otherwise, whether it's, I have to cross this bridge and nothing is going to stop me. Even it can be something as simple as that, or I have to get this person to fall in love with me. That's my whole life mission. Then you've got somebody who you can put stumbling blocks in their way, whether they be physical stumbling blocks, like actual things, hurdles they have to get over or under, or things like that, or whether they're emotional barriers. They have to learn certain lessons or accept certain things about themselves. You have to put those things in their way, so that they then have to strive and persevere to get through those obstacles, and they're going to get knocked back further and further each time, until finally it looks like they've lost all hope altogether. And then that's when they're going to have the ultimate realization of how to either get what they want, or they're going to realize that the thing they wanted actually isn't that important, and that they've changed in other ways. And that fundamentally is what makes a good story, is following those characters along. And the absolute, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. The absolute masters of that kind of story are Pixar. Like, they are just, they have a formula where every character think of Woody and how much he believes in looking after Andy and sticking with Andy through every single film. And it doesn't matter what anybody says. And he can get into the same problem every single time, but it's because he believes that what he's doing fundamentally and 100%, and nothing is going to stop him from doing that thing, getting back to Andy when he's stuck in a nursery, and he'll leave all his friends behind. He doesn't care. Like, he is going back. And so I think that fundamentally is what's really, really interesting. So finding a character and finding what they really, 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 really want, and then finding a way to essentially ramp up the stakes higher and higher and higher, so that it's harder and harder all the time, and there's more and more at risk.
So I really like what you said. You kind of, it sounds like you basically torture the character into thinking differently at the end of the day. How do you know when you've raised the stakes enough? Like, when you've thrown enough stuff at the character for them to change, like, how do you know you've hit the right point?
I don't think there's any hard and fast rule to that. I think that's something that's a kind of instinct that you build over time, by, like I said, like read scripts, read as many scripts as you can, watch as many movies as you can, and you'll see it. It'll just kind of soak into you, I think, and you'll build a really good instinct for how to put characters through that. There is always a stage where you think you've done enough, but actually there's another thing you could do to them, and that's always kind of the most satisfying one, I think. There's always a little bit further you can push them anymore, and that's always quite a satisfying moment in a story, I think. But yeah, it's there's no easy guide to like, have you done this? You've done, then stop. Like you kind of know. Your character should, if your character is really nicely fleshed out and you've done all the work in thinking about that character at the start and knowing who they are, where they come from, what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, what they're bad at, that character will start to come alive, and a good character will kind of make decisions for you almost along a script, in the sense that you'll be able to let them make decisions. And if you've set up your world and your hurdles well, that character's actions will lead you to the next hurdle, will lead you to the next problem. And they will take you there themselves until it gets to a point where you think, oh God, I've got to put this character out of his misery because this is just too much. Like there will come a stage where they basically, they have to give up. Like they can't handle it anymore. Gotcha. And that's, that's.
Are there certain things that you make sure you include in every story you tell? Like other than the character and the arc, are there certain elements where you're like, now the plot has to be taken here, or now, like, I don't know, like, are there things that you just have a checklist for?
I mean, I do tend to stick to a kind of a classic 3-act structure, which follows the kind of format that I've just kind of drawn out. So you have a setup at the beginning where you meet your character, and then they are essentially something is going to happen to them in their world that is going to give them a goal. So they have to then achieve something, whether that's getting something back that they've lost, whether it's going after someone that they want to chase down, or all those myriad different kinds of stories, whether you're telling a horror story, an action story, an adventure story, a fantasy story. That is, at that early stage of the story is what we'd call an inciting incident a lot of the time. And that inciting incident gives that character a goal. And that's when you move into your kind of second act of your story, where that your character is trying to achieve that goal. And essentially that's when you get into the and then, or rather the like, but. So you're telling your story, he tries to do this, but this happens. So he does this, but this happens, and so on and so forth. That's kind of your second act. And then it gets to a stage where your character has failed so much that it looks like the game is over. And, this is the kind of what some people refer to as a kind of moment of death, where everything looks lost and you're pretty sure that's, it's not the end of the story, because you've seen the story before, and that they're not actually going, the hero isn't going to die like 60 minutes into a film. But that's your moment of death, and that kind of signals when you go from kind of act 2 into act 3, and then that last act is about resolving that issue. So that moment of death is normally very quickly followed by that moment of like realization, that like epiphany, where they realize, oh my God, like I've been thinking about this the wrong way all along, or, oh, I've just twigged that the villain does this, and I got this thing in my bag that I could use, one of those like classic, like MacGuffin type things. And then act 3 is the big fight, the chase through the airport, the battle in space where he shoots down a chimney and blows up a giant planet. That's Star Wars, right? Yeah. And that's your resolution, and that tends to be how it works. And I think obviously you that's a structure that you can hang pretty much any genre, and that's what you'll be taught at film most of the time. That's what you'll read in pretty much every screenwriting manual, which I don't recommend necessarily going out and reading every screenwriting book. Like you can learn that just by watching films. But yeah, those are the kind of beats that a traditional story tends to follow, whether it's a 7-minute episode of television or a 2-hour-long feature film.
I think I have one more question about the story format, and it's how do you make sure your ending is satisfactory? Like, other than tying up the loose ends in the story arc.
How do I make sure it's satisfactory?
There are some films that I watch that I'm like, it's entertaining, but not it was okay. And then there are other ones where I'm like, this was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. You know, where there's obviously a difference. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily know what it is.
No, I don't, and again, I don't think there's any magic formula to it. I think a lot of it, I think if there are problems at the end of a film, it's normally because it can normally be traced back to problems at the start, and it can normally be traced back to the fact that the characters are maybe two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional, or they don't have enough depth, or they're doing things that you don't buy. You know, they're making decisions that you don't believe are very real. And that comes from, that's the work. Like, that's the work of a writer, is to go through those scripts, and when something isn't working, find why it's not working. Think about why it's not working, or why, if an ending is falling flat because it's not dramatic enough, or maybe you haven't raised the stakes enough. Like, maybe your character doesn't have enough on the line by the time you get to that resolution, or that final battle. Like, if you don't believe that one character would want to be with another character, or you haven't done the work in building a character's emotional journey, so that when they do fall in love with this character, you absolutely believe it, and you really, really, really want them to be with that other character, you're not going to care about the airport chase at the end, or you're not going to. It doesn't matter how many fun little setups you've got at the start that you can tie off in a nice, neat little bow at the end. If it falls flat, it falls flat because of character. It never falls flat because of a dodgy bit of plotting or this, that, and the other. It almost always is because of character. I'm a bit of a character evangelist. Like, I'm quite hardcore about it. I do believe it very deeply.
So I'm wondering, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the career aspects. How do you make yourself invaluable as a writer, like to make sure that Hey Dugee keeps coming back to you with contracts and that other people are seeing your work?
I mean, fundamentally, I'm gonna put being a good writer to one side, like the actual craft of it. Obviously, that's very, very important. But the chances are you won't get a job in the first place if you're not a good writer. Like, I'm assuming that you've got the job because you have skill and talent. That's great. Congratulations. But the kind of characteristics you need as a writer to, I think, build a career and keep working and keep having head writers and showrunners come back to you is, you need to be receptive. So you need to be good at taking notes and not be protective over your work. Like, don't think that you are Stanley Kubrick when you're not. Like, if someone gives you a note saying this doesn't work, most of the time there's a reason why it doesn't work, and it may be technical, it may be story based, but if you don't think it works, ask them why. Or if you think you can stand up for something, stand up for it and be that, but be prepared for them to say, no, really, it doesn't work, we need you to change it, and then be okay with that. So be a good, I guess, is using the way that you are in that sense. Like, be receptive to notes and learn how to do that. Be a nice person. Do you know what I mean? Like, fundamentally, it comes down to be the person that you would like to share an office with. Like somebody who doesn't moan about stuff not going their way all the time. Don't get pissy but you didn't get what you think you're owed. Like, be impatient, be flexible, be polite, be kind and generous. Be a good egg. is my main headline.
I like your answer. This question was actually a test, because I ask it to pretty much everybody that I have on my podcast, because it really dispels the myth that I used to believe that in order to be successful in a career, my skill is what's going to project me forward forever. But it's almost like there's a bar of skill that you need to pass, and then you also need all these people skills and relationships and all this other stuff, and a humble attitude and open to feedback that people don't really talk about too much if you're not in the industry, if you're just, on the outside looking in. So I am wondering, and maybe, I don't know if you can answer this, but how would you move into a head writer position? Do you have to become a showrunner?
No, you don't. No, there's lots of writers who don't run shows and don't head write shows. It's a very different skill. I think being a head writer is essentially more like a management role. You might write a few scripts yourself, but your job is ostensibly to manage other writers. And some people aren't cut out for that. They don't want to do that job. Some people want to write. They want to be creative. They want to be the person getting notes and solving those problems. Like you said before, it's a lot of the time it's a problem solving task. Some people are very, very, very good head writers because they are very, very astute judges of character. They understand the people around them and they know how to get the best out of people. Some people are bad head writers because they aren't very good at judging character. They maybe aren't very good at giving notes back, or they aren't very good at communicating what they want in a way that is easy to understand. If you want to take the leap from being a writer for hire or a staff writer up to being a showrunner or a head writer, you're going to need a good chunk of experience. Like no one's going to give you that job unless you've written a lot of scripts, because why would they? Like why would they hire somebody who is inexperienced to essentially oversee the scripts on an entire series of a show that costs an awful lot of money to make? So they're going to give it to someone with a lot of experience. So it just takes time, and you need to let people know. Like it's important to don't assume that someone is going to come to you and say, "Would you like to be a head writer?" Let people know that that's what you want to do. When someone says to you, or they don't even have to say it to you. If you're working on a show or you're working with a producer that you like, you think you've got a good amount of experience, and you think you've got the ability and the skill to do that job, say to someone. Say, look, if you're ever looking for a head writer on another show, I'd really like to do this. Or say to a head writer, can I shadow you for a bit? Can I just ask you about this, see how it goes? Like that's really important, and that's how you learn, right? You learn from watching other people work and asking them the important questions, and doing that work. I think sometimes a lot of people aren't patient and want to rush into basically getting the top job when they just haven't done the work and haven't learned the skills and the craft at the start.
That makes sense. I'm thinking, what if I'm starting out fresh? What is something that you would recommend that I do right now to try to become or get into writing for kids TV specifically?
For kids TV, watch kids TV. Know what's being made. Like look around and see what Cartoon Network are making, what Disney are making, what Nickelodeon, or if you're in the UK, you've got the BBC. That's where pretty much the bulk of shows aim to be, because they are a massive broadcaster and it's a really great, it's a really heritage brand. But we also have Disney and Disney XD and everything like that. So you can see what's being made on those different channels. You can see how shows change when they're aimed at different audiences. So you can see what a preschool show looks like and feels like compared to a show that's aimed at, say, like 5 to 8s or 6 to 10s. You can see what's different between an action show and a comedy show. So say like The World of Gumball is very, very different to, say, Transformers or Thunderbirds. Like they are very, very different shows. They have a very different sensibility. They have a very different tone to them. And so you need to do that research and find out and see how they're different. And at the same time, if you can find scripts for animated kids shows online, which you can in the UK, there's the BBC Writers Room is really, really helpful. They have a bank of scripts on there that are from their shows, and they have loads of really, really good scripts by really, really good writers on there. That's a really, really good resource, the Writers Room. And obviously you can get those scripts if you're in the US as well. They have scripts for TV drama as well. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's a really, really good resource. But if you can find those scripts, and even reading things like pitch bibles, I found the pitch bible for Adventure Time and Over the Garden Wall and things like that online, because I'm just fascinated to see how they started and how those characters are described by the people who made that show. And it's a really fascinating insight, and you can see just the quality of the writing and the quality of the characterization of them. It goes back a long, long way. It doesn't happen by accident. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, maybe this has the same answer, but I'm thinking from like if I want to become a storyboard artist or like a showrunner or just direct work in general, and I'm not going to become a professional writer. It sounds like your answer is just going to be like study all these things, but what are some things that I can do right now to start developing those skills and that judgment?
Well, I think another thing you can do on top of reading and watching is to do what we talked about before and just and reach out to people and see if there are ways of learning that you can do, people you can get access to, that you can ask questions. I think fundamentally, and this is another thing I would add to what makes a good writer, is curiosity is so important. To keep wanting to learn and keep recognizing that there is always something more you can learn. It doesn't matter if you've been a storyboard artist for a year or 15 years, you can still learn something from somebody, whether that's somebody younger than you who's got a fresh eye, who's doing things that you haven't done before, or whether it's someone senior to you who's got more experience than you, who maybe knows like tips and tricks and can, who knows routines that can make your work better. Like, if you can find people who are good at what they do, be a good person and try and build relationships with those people, you can learn immense amounts of stuff, because people are generous. In animation, people are really, really generous, and they always want to help and they always want to share things. So go on Twitter and go on LinkedIn if you can bear it. I mean, it's a horrible place, but like it can be helpful sometimes.
That's where we met, isn't it?
Exactly, right. It does help. Like from a pure networking point of view, LinkedIn is fine. But from like a visual and kind of inspiration point of view, Twitter's amazing. The amount of people on there who are posting their work, who are writing about their process, who are open, who are doing like Q&As online all the time. Go and find those people. Go and find those people who are doing, and ask them questions and say like, I love your work. Could you, I'm just starting out. Have you got any tips about, I'm struggling with this? I think it's always good to be quite specific and say, I want to be this kind of artist, or I want to be this kind of writer. I'm trying to write a short film. It's this kind of genre. I'm getting stuck here, or I'm getting stuck with character. Like, do you have any tips of how to really flesh out my character? And people will help you. It's not hard. It doesn't take them long, and they will be generous about it. As long as you're not like, hey, you owe me, tell me this thing. Yeah. They'll tell you.
I follow you, so you owe me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. I was actually
I hope that's.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the social media thing, because like as an animator, it's very easy for me, well, not easy, but I would assume easier to get attention online for posting an animation because it's highly visual, versus if I'm writing and I post a script on my Instagram, I don't know if anybody would, it's not going to get the same attention.
It's not easy. It's like, as a writer, you're not gonna be out there posting pages of screenplays. I've seen odd writers do it, and it's really doesn't really have any impact. It's not a visual medium.
So it's more about connecting than actually putting your work out there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but Twitter is great because you can showcase. If you're a comedy writer, Twitter's brilliant, right? You can showcase your talents as a joke writer on Twitter there and all the time, 10 times a day if you want to. You can write jokes and you can throw them out. You can respond to things that are happening culturally. You can write jokes about hashtags that are trending. You can show your talent and your ability to build a platform of humor and show that you're funny and show how you can connect with people, and you can get involved with conversations that other people are having and talk about shows that you think are cool and why you think they're cool, and you can demonstrate your understanding of an industry. A lot of writers I really admire talk to each other about why certain stories or certain films, why they think they work. And what I admire, when I admire them, it's because they're able to talk about it openly and be open to other people saying, oh, I disagree. I actually think that this really worked or that really worked. People who are like, this sucks, and I don't care if anyone disagrees with me. I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe not you. But the people who are there saying, oh, I thought this was great and I really connected with this character and this is why, or, didn't that episode have a really cool story, and didn't it go on a funny arc, or it did use this really nice device in the middle, and that gets people talking. And if you're a young writer, that's free for you to do. You can go out there and you can show people that you love animation and you love writing, and that you know what you're talking about. Even if it's early on, again, like, be humble. Don't think you know everything, but show people that you're enthusiastic and you're willing, and use your bio at the top to tell people that you're a writer. Don't be afraid to say, I'm a writer at the top. Don't be afraid to say that, and don't be afraid to reach out to other writers and say, hey, can I read your work? Do you want to read my work? Whatever, have a go. Like, there's nothing bad about it.
I would have never thought of Twitter as like a really great way to connect with other writers. I think that's great.
Yeah,
I have one more question. Is writing for Dugee a full-time job for you? Is it like a full-time thing, or are you taking contracts and things from all around the place? Or
it is not a full-time job. I think in the UK, writing for kids TV, writing animation, it's actually quite hard to turn it into a full-time job because of how infrequent the work is sometimes, how long you can go without, how it comes in kind of droughts and floods. Like, sometimes you'll have no work for 4 months and then suddenly you're working on 3 episodes at once. But one of those episodes you might not be getting paid for right away, and this, that, and the other. Like, it's a very, unpredictable business, and that's fine. That's kind of just the nature of the industry. So a lot of writers, apart from the very established people who are on, who are kind of constantly working, or if you're head writing a show, you're on a contract for a long time. So that's a full-time job. If you're a head writer or showrunner, that's a full-time job. If you're a freelance writer and you're just writing on an episode by episode basis, a lot of people do work outside of that. So I write copy for ad agencies as well. So I write headlines and log lines. I write copy for people's websites. I write stories about things that are interesting to people who are like members of certain organizations, charities, and heritage trusts and wildlife organizations and people like that. I write for like museums, and I've managed now to niche down so that I'm writing things that are aimed at kids pretty much all the time, which is really cool, because that took me a long time to get to that stage where I was like, I write for kids, and people say, well, yeah, you do. Okay, we'll hire you for that. So just the other day I was writing tweets for the social media feed for a show that's just gone live on the BBC, a kids show, which is really weird. Like, a show that I could ostensibly be writing episodes for, and write tweets to promote it instead. And I don't mind that at all. I feel like it's all part and parcel of the same ecosystem. And if I'm writing cute jokes about a character on Twitter and maybe not on the show, then I don't mind. Like, it's fine.
I had no idea Twitter or people were hiring writers to write their tweets. I thought it was like social media managers just like sitting in an office. I don't know. That's like,
well, I think it is. I think they were just like, I think it was just because I'd met one of them at a conference, and she was like, "Oh, I run a essentially a media agency for children's brands," and I was like, "Oh, cool! I write copy as well as scripts." She was like, "Oh, cool!" We did a lot of that back. And then 6-7 months down the line, there you go. Like, we need. Do you do this stuff? And I said, yeah, sure. And he's
networking once again.
Yeah, you got to network. You got to get out there, shake people's hands. Don't shake people's hands, but elbow bump and nod at them across a room.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to share, James?
No, just that, like, I really love your podcast, and I'm really glad you have it. It's been a pleasure talking about writing for 2 hours. I don't get to do it very often. It's really cool.
I'm a big fan of writing as well. I like to write, but this has been great for me to just listen. Right? I don't know if you heard me typing, but I was like taking notes on some of the things you were saying, because I also want to get into, I'm in animation and I want to direct my own stuff and become a showrunner. And this is all very important stuff for me to try to own over the next couple of years. So
yeah, man, I think it's important. I think animators really benefit from learning how to write, and I think writers who want to write for animation would really benefit from understanding animation at the same time. I think there's a crossover, and you should.
You didn't say writers would benefit from learning how to animate, though.
I did say that. Did I not just say that? Learning about animation and the process. I would love to learn how to animate. Oh man, that's time I don't have.
Well, I can teach you, I guess, in exchange for you write the first series of my show. Well, thank you so much, James, for coming on the podcast. I'm really happy to have had you.
Thank you.
Excellent. And if you're interested in following James or getting in touch with him, you can do so by going over to Twitter and looking him up. And his handle is @WalshPJames. And I'll include that link in the description of this podcast. And that's all for now. So thank you so much for listening. Okay, bye.